The year is 1470. High in the mountains of Thessaly, a bell rings across a valley that will never hear it again. Inside the stone walls of the convent of St. Catherine, 23 women kneel in prayer, their lips moving in perfect unison, repeating words they have spoken for years. But this morning the prayer tastes different, like ash, like farewell. Beyond the walls a horizon burns red, not with sunrise but with banners, as the Ottoman army does not march but flows like a river of steel and fire consuming everything in its path. At the altar stands Sister Lani, the abbess, clutching a silver crucifix that has survived 3 generations, her hands trembling not from fear but from certainty, for she knows what is coming, though none of them can imagine that death would have been a mercy. What follows is not found in the history books, buried instead beneath centuries of silence, because what the Ottomans did here was not merely conquest, but something far more deliberate, something historians are only now beginning to uncover. The truth is not about whether it can be endured, but whether it will be remembered, for some stories vanish while others are endlessly repeated. To understand this one, we must go back 17 years earlier to 1453, when Constantinople fell after 1,000 years of endurance, its crosses torn down, its mosaics buried, its bells melted, and within days a call to prayer echoed where hymns had risen for 9 centuries, as Sultan Mehmed II declared Hagia Sophia Mosque, not out of necessity but out of understanding that you do not defeat a people by killing them but by erasing who they were. The Ottomans did not merely conquer land, they conquered identity, and when Mehmed looked west he saw wounds that refused to heal, every ringing church bell, every standing monastery, every cross casting its shadow on conquered soil, every nun praying in Latin, each a defiant reminder that faith could outlast armies. So the decision was made. If they would not convert, they would disappear, not through massacre, for massacre creates martyrs and martyrs create memory, but through something far more calculated, something that left no songs, no stories, no trace. By 1470, the strategy of erasure had already been tested across the empire, in Greek monasteries of Moria, Serbian convents in the Balkans, Armenian churches of Anatolia. They did not burn them all. Some were converted, others were abandoned. But the pattern never changed. First came the offer, then came the silence. The convent of St. Catherine, perched alone on a hillside in Thessaly, far from any garrison or ally, was about to become another test case, another quiet footnote in the march of empire. The women inside did not know they were footnotes. They were not warriors. They were women of silence and prayer, their weapons rosaries, their armor faith. Most had never seen a soldier, never held a blade, never imagined they would need to. Sister Llewellyn had served as abbess for 12 years. Before that she had tended the sick in a village that vanished in the plague of 1448. She came to the convent not to escape the world, but to understand it. Sister Magdalena was 19, her hands still rough from her father's farm, having taken her vows only 2 years early after her family was killed in a raid, the convent the only place she had known safety since. Sister Theodorus was 70, having outlived 2 abbesses, an emperor, and more wars than she could count, long past the fear of death. Yet none of them had ever faced this. And if this moment does not compel us to remember, then we have missed the lesson our ancestors died to teach, that the most dangerous act in the face of power is refusing to forget who you are. At dawn the first cannonball strikes, not the chapel, but the bell tower. The sound is apocalyptic. Stone erupts into the air. Iron shrieks against iron, and the bell that had called into prayer for 140 years shatters mid-swing, its fragments raining into the courtyard where herbs once grew for healing. The same hands that tended those plants now cover trembling ears. Sister Llewellyn does not scream. She raises a crucifix and begins to sing, Kyrie eleison, Lord, have mercy. One by one the others join her, 23 voices rising against the roar of empire. But empires do not listen to songs. By midday the gates are breached. Ottoman soldiers pour into the courtyard, not with swords, but with ledgers, quills, and inkpots, moving like clocks, not conquerors, counting, recording, cataloguing, because to them these women are not people, they are assets. A translator steps forward, a Greek man who once lived in these hills, his voice trembling as he reads from a scroll, shame woven into every word. By decree of Sultan Mehmed II, all subjects of the conquered land were ordered to submit to the authority of the Sublime Porte. Those who converted would receive protection, those who refused would bear the cost of rebellion. Sister Llewellyn stepped forward, her face calm, almost serene, speaking not to the soldiers but to the trembling translator in clear Greek. "Tell your sultan we have already given our lives to a king. We have nothing left to surrender." The officer in command, Hassan Pasha, whose name appears in Ottoman campaign records of the 1470 Thessalian expedition, answered not with anger but with a smile, because he understood something the sisters did not yet know. The Ottomans had mastered the art of breaking people without killing them. That night the women were sealed inside their own chapel, denied food and water, left in darkness while soldiers outside laugh and live, waiting to see who would break first. 2 young sisters wept, but Magdalena, barely 20, began whispering a psalm. "The Lord is my shepherd. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." And one by one the sobbing stopped. These women had spent their lives preparing for suffering, fasting, cold vigils, silence, obedience. What the soldiers called torture, they called discipline. On the 2nd day bread and water were placed before them. They refused it. By the 3rd day their lips bled, their hands shook, but they did not break. Hassan Pasha watched from the courtyard, impressed, frustrated, perhaps even respectful, yet unchanged. When he returned, he offered mercy, new lives, new names, protection, or a journey to Constantinople where the Sultan himself would hear them, but the road was long, and the weak did not survive it. Sister Llewellyn looked at her sisters, many barely conscious, and answered, "We will walk." They departed at dawn on the 4th day, 23 women bound with rope, no carts, no horses, only sun, dust, and distance as punishment. On the 2nd day Sister Irene collapsed. 2 others carried her for miles until she died that night, buried by the roadside with bare hands, and whispered prayers while Hassan marked his ledger, 22 remaining. On the 4th day Sister Callista simply sat down, closed her eyes, and never rose again. By the time they reached the port of Volo 7 days later, only 18 remained, and somewhere along that road the sisters stopped weeping and stopped pleading, not in defeat, but in certainty. They walked in silence, a silence chosen. On the morning of the 7th day, as Sister Llewellyn still led them with bound hands, Hassan Pasha called for her. She is taken to Hassan Pasha's tent alone. What happens there is not recorded in Ottoman documents, but in a letter written by a Venetian merchant, discovered in 2003 in the archives of Dubrovnik. He writes that at dawn he saw them bring her back unable to walk, her eyes open yet empty, as if her soul had been left somewhere behind. They dressed her in silk and paraded her through the camp as a convert, but when he passed close he saw her lips still moving, praying in Latin. She had not broken, they had only taken her body and left her spirit wandering. This was a strategy history rarely teaches, not martyrs, who inspire songs and resistance, but ghosts, living warnings that faith was powerless against empire. Sister Llewellyn walked the rest of the journey without speaking, without meeting anyone's gaze, present but no longer whole. At the port of Volos, the remaining sisters were chained to the benches of a galley, listed in the ship's manifest not by name but by number. Religious captives, female, 18, destination imperial household, purpose domestic service and conversion. The 12-day voyage was brutal. Storms, sickness, hunger, despair. At night Sister Magdalena whispered psalms so softly the sea itself seemed to pause, and even the chained prisoners beside them listened. When Constantinople finally rose before them, gleaming in the dawn like a blade, they were marched through streets of merchants, soldiers, and slaves, forced to kneel in the shadow of Hagia Sophia as a call to prayer echoed above what had once been their fate's crown. Beneath Topkapi Palace, they were taken into tunnels of damp stone and darkness to a place that officially did not exist. There, for months or perhaps years, they labored by day as silent servants and gathered by night in a hidden room, praying from memory, sharing bread and water as communion, carving crosses into the stone with broken pottery. When archaeologists uncovered the chamber in 2011, they found dozens of those crosses, and beneath them 4 Latin words, Lux in tenebris lucet, the light shines in the darkness. Among the markings was a small bird in 23 lines, 1 for each sister, though only 11 were complete, the rest fading into nothing. A Venetian captive wrote in 1478 of hearing women singing Latin prayers beneath the harem, a story long dismissed as myth, until the chamber was found. And there, on the wall, the crosses simply stop. Halfway across the wall, the scratches become frantic, desperate, the lines cut deeper as if carved with failing hands and rising urgency, and then nothing. Ottoman records from 1482 mention a cleansing of palace staff under the new sultan. Those deemed unproductive or resistant were removed, with no names, no graves, no explanation, only a single word written neatly in a ledger: disposed. The 18 surviving nuns of St. Catherine vanished from history, women who had walked 7 days through hell, crossed the sea in chains, and carved prayers into stone in the dark, gone. But their chapel remained. A French diplomat wrote in 1712 of a rumor among aging palace servants that on certain nights the lower halls grew cold, and if one listened closely, women could be heard singing in Latin. He dismissed it as superstition. The walls did not. In 2011, archaeologists found traces of candle wax mixed with herbs, not Ottoman in origin, but the kind nuns made in convents, proof that the vigil lasted far longer than anyone imagined. Months, perhaps years, as they carved crosses, whispered prayers, and refused to disappear. Sister Magdalena's bird was a final mark on the wall. Beside it, 2 faint Greek words: we endure. And endure they did, leaving behind what empires could not erase, a room of crosses, prayers carved in stone, evidence that faith can survive where chains and walls cannot. The Ottoman Empire ruled for 6 centuries, conquering 3 continents, reshaping nations, languages, and faiths, yet it could not erase 18 women armed only with fingernails and belief. They did not win as empires measure victory, but they left a mark, and while history is written by the victors, memory is written by the survivors. A cross in the dark, a whisper in a forbidden language, a bird scratched into stone, and centuries later, we still found them. These women walked forward into darkness knowing they might never return, crossed the sea in chains knowing what awaited them, descended beneath a palace knowing sunlight might never touch them again, yet they carved their prayers anyway, trusting that someone, someday, would look backward and find them. You just did. When the archaeologists stood in that hidden chamber in 2011, one of them asked a question that still haunts us. How long did they keep the vigil? The wax, the depth of the carvings, the fading scratches all suggest years. Night after night, in absolute darkness, even as sisters vanished and hope should have died, they kept believing, and they kept carving. That was not merely faith, it was defiance in its purest form. The Ottoman Empire is gone now, dissolved in 1922. Its sultans are dust, its armies only memory. The palace still stands, but as a museum, where tourists wander unaware of what lies beneath their feet. Yet the crosses remain, and the Latin words, faint after 5 centuries, still speak. Lux in tenebris lucet, the light shines in the darkness. A verse from the Gospel of John, about a light that cannot be extinguished, about truth that survives when everything else is taken away. Sister Magdalena carved those words knowing she would never leave that palace, knowing her name would vanish, knowing the world would continue without her, and she carved them anyway, because she understood something empires never do. You can conquer land, rewrite history, erase names from ledgers, bury bodies in unmarked graves, but you cannot kill what people carry inside them, and you cannot silence what they carve into stone. You have just witnessed one of history's darkest truths, and one of its greatest triumphs. The nuns of St. Catherine were meant to disappear, erased, broken, turned into ghosts or footnotes. But they did not disappear. They remain in those crosses, in that prayer, in the hidden chapel found 500 years later, and now they remain with you, because you listened, because you remembered, because you refused to let their silence be the final word. Lux in tenebris lucet. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.